right. Hello, everybody. Jeff Kolb, chairman of the SPJ Sports Committee here once again, welcoming you to our June event with the one and only Mina of ESPN. Mina, great to have you with us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So a couple things just wanted to point out before we jump into questions. Our vice chair, Lauren Vassallo, will be leading this conversation tonight. One thing that a few people have been asking me is, can you watch these events after they've happened? The answer is yes. These recordings are all put to YouTube. I'll make sure to send that link out here in just a few minutes. But with that, LV, why don't you take it away?
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Thank you, as Jeff said, for coming. So I think we're just going to get right into it. So hello, Mina. I'm just going to give you a brief intro as to who you are. So Mina is from Omaha, Nebraska, and she moved to Arizona as a teenager. She graduated summa cum laude from Yale in 2007 with a BA in English. She started off her career as a business journalist and then as an investigative journalist and won many very prestigious awards. She was offered a job at ESPN after penning a Tumblr essay about the bond between herself and her dad and the Seattle Seahawks, which, if you guys have not read that, highly recommend. It's a great read. At ESPN, she is a writer, an active panelist at Around the Horn, and has appeared on many of ESPN's flagship shows. In 2020, she was announced as the NFL analyst for ESPN's relaunch of NFL Live. She hosts an NFL podcast with the best goodest boy, Lenny. And yeah, so I just want to say, like Jeff said, we're going to be taking questions throughout. So raise your hand when you have a question. And when you're called upon, please state your name and your occupation or what college you go to. And we just ask that you have your questions be focused on journalism and career endeavors, no fantasy football tips or anything like that. So I guess let's just start. I know I gave you a brief rundown of your career, Mina, but give us a quick rundown of how you got to where you are, how you got into ESPN, just writing this essay. Is this something you ever thought would happen? And just give us a brief overview of your career.
Yeah, as you kind of heard, my career, it has been pretty wide-ranging. So truly feel free to ask questions about any portion of it, because there have been separate portions, including at ESPN. As you just heard, I started out as a business journalist. My first job out of college was at a magazine called Fortune Small Business, where I interned. It doesn't exist anymore. Moved to Fortune, where I wrote about investing and finance, which is not something I ever aspired to do. I kind of landed in it, learned a lot of it on the fly, frankly, before joining the investigative team at Fortune, which I did for a few years. And that sort of stemmed from the writing I did about the markets, money managers, that sort of thing, eventually more investigating companies, healthcare companies in particular. And then when I joined Bloomberg, I joined their investigative team in a really similar capacity, doing long, multi-month investigations into companies. So that was kind of the first, I guess, half, I don't know, my career. Always a rabid sports fan, never thought I would work in sports, never thought I would write about sports, certainly never thought I would be on TV talking about sports. But in 2014, I believe it was, ESPN, the magazine, some editors there came across a personal essay I wrote about football. Also saw that most of my social media was dumb stuff about football. And they reached out to me and said, you're a features writer, an investigative reporter, but seem to spend a lot of time watching football. Would you ever be interested in writing about football? I wasn't recruited by ESPN to be an analyst or opinionator. It was as a writer. So I joined the magazine there, which doesn't exist anymore. It's a sad commonality talking about magazines, unfortunately. And, for the first few years at ESPN, I was a features writer / columnist for the magazine, which was a total blast. Got to write a really wide variety of features at ESPN, profiles of athletes, a lot of NFL players, some basketball, baseball players. as well. And then I got to do a little bit of investigative work, got to travel, went to Korea a bunch for some features I did, covered the Olympics, total blast. But around 2016, 17, I started integrating more podcasting and radio into my portfolio of work at ESPN. I started doing football appearances on my friend Bill Barnwell's podcast. I launched a radio show. I started doing fantasy football radio and then just football radio. And then I became a panelist on Around the Horn, which sort of marked kind of a transition for me in my career, going from being a writer to being someone who wore a lot of hats at ESPN. 2020, I believe it was, I launched the daily podcast for ESPN. And then not about a year after that, maybe it was 2020. Yeah, it was that fall. So I think 2019 is when I launched the daily podcast. Anyways, 2020 is when I became an NFL analyst, when we rebooted NFL Live. Maybe it was 2021, actually. In any case, it was during the pandemic, I remember. And my job title changed yet again from senior writer to NFL analyst, which essentially means, like primarily former players at ESPN. My job is as an opinionator talking about football, mainly on NFL Live, but also on shows like First Take, Sports Center. I still do Around the Horn as a generalist, fill in on PTI sometimes. And then I maintain my own podcast, which is a football podcast that I've done since 2018, I think. It's been quite some time, the Mina Show. So I don't really write too much. I think the last feature I wrote was a profile of Justin Herbert, maybe 2 years ago. And for the most part, I'm primarily just someone giving opinions on TV and analyzing football. But yeah, like I said, I'm really happy to talk about any of it. It's been quite a ride and certainly not something I ever planned for or anticipated.
So I want to piggyback off that because as I was doing my research on you, as you just said, you've never imagined to be doing what you're doing today professionally. And my question to you is, how has taking that unknown, potentially scary step, that path that you never thought you'd go down, how has that benefited your career? And would you go back and do it again?
Yeah, a lot of the opportunities I got along the way in journalism and then in television were not ones that I originally sought out. Even that goes back to becoming an investigative reporter was not something that I or even a business journalist. Honestly, in college, I thought I was going to write about, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I was thinking culture, arts, didn't think I would be a business. I didn't study business in college, but I got placed at Fortune Small Business and just decided to make the most of it and learn and kind of approach it with a learner's mind, I guess. And the same thing, joining my first investigative assignment was not something that I pitched. When I joined ESPN, they approached me. When I started doing TV, it wasn't, again, I wasn't like pitching myself necessarily. I'd gone on TV to talk about my stories, but some producers thought, well, you seem to have a lot of opinions about X's and O's. You want to try giving them on TV? All of which is to say, I never really had like a 5-year plan for any of it, but I also don't want to make it sound like things just happened to me because I think the one thing that's been a little bit of a through line is when people have suggested these things and they haven't always been like, hey, we want to make you NFL analysts. It's more been like, there's been so many tiny steps along the way. Like, hey, would you like to come on and do a radio hit, a 10-minute hit at 6 a.m. about the NFL on the Sunday show, or things like that. I really said yes a lot and never really looked ahead to the next thing, just really focused on the opportunity that was in front of me and tried to figure out A, how to do it well, and B, whether I liked it. And it's been kind of a bit of a winding path, but I think I've always been open to these opportunities and kind of unafraid to really try. That sounds odd, but I think sometimes in life, if we're not sure if we can do something well, or if we even want to, we can be kind of hesitant to pour ourselves into it. And a lot of the things I did, from investigative reporting up through being an NFL analyst, I wasn't sure at the time that that's what I wanted to do for a living, but I figured, why not try and see how it goes and really pour myself into it. And I think that's paid off.
And what sort of tools, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself, because I am one of those people that sometimes I do get afraid to try, because I have no idea how to approach it. I don't know anything about it, but I know you're a lifelong learner. You love to learn, you love school, you love to read. So what tools and resources and practices and any other sort of learning have you utilized to build your confidence and to not have like imposter syndrome?
Yeah, really just over preparing for everything. A lot of it actually kind of flows from when I was a reporter. I never thought of myself as the most intrepid questioner, and certainly with investigative journalism, there's a lot of confrontation that I didn't feel particularly ready for, but I always felt like, well, I can go into this having read literally everything on it. And I would when I would do interviews, I would read literally everything ever did and listen to everything. And this actually really helped when I started profiling athletes in terms of convincing them to do it, because I remember when I profiled Aaron Rodgers a while, I was like, another lifetime, let me tell you that. But it was, I think, 2017 or something. Anyways, he hadn't done interviews, which is, again, very distant from now. But I read everything he'd ever said and sent him like a extremely long email to that effect. So I think just going in with like a ton of prep. And then when I started doing analysis, I took the same approach. Like, I don't really know how to be on TV, but I do know that I can talk to a lot of people and read just about everything, so that at the very minimum, I have a pretty large foundation of knowledge to build on and preparation. And I actually think, that took me to a certain level in television. To get to the next level, I almost had to unlearn it a little bit, because I could be over prepared and over rehearsed at times instead of being natural and kind of comfortable. But at the beginning, when I started new opportunities, I've always been a total prep freak. I mean, when I first did my first radio show, was a fantasy football show in Bristol on Sundays, which I lived in New York, so that was not fun. But I would show up with just like 40, 50 pages of notes, which was totally unnecessary, really, really extra. But it helped me at first feel like, even though I didn't really know how to be a radio person, at least I had done the work.
Yeah, and I think that I understand too when it comes to over preparing, because when you're on a TV hit and it's like you have 50 pages of notes, but you have a minute to talk. So I can imagine trying to concisely put everything together that you need to. Jeff, I'm going to throw it to you for your next question.
Yeah, I know. And we have some questions. We'll get to them in just a moment. I just wanted to sort of piggyback off of the question before about how you've transitioned from one thing to the next, and just said, yes, a lot, like you were saying, Mina. When you take that concept and look towards the future and how the industry is right now, and there's so much change, and some of that's hard with seeing layoffs like this week at the Athletic and things like that. What would be your advice, or how do you think about those concepts as far as being able to reinvent yourself or not be stuck in a certain mold, so that you can, for lack of a nicer term, survive in this industry?
I found that whether it's reporting and writing, blogging, podcasting, being on television, whatever, there does seem to be a through line in terms of folks who have staying power or get recommended for new things, which is having expertise. I know that sounds really obvious, but I always tell whenever I talk to young people who aren't quite sure what they want to do exactly in sports media, whether they want to be on camera or write or whatever, I always say, like, the thing you have to do is develop some sort of expertise. For me, like I said, with certain aspects of football, I knew early on, well, here are the things that I can become an expert in, finding ways to use data and present them, or I can become really, I can become good at the cap. I can get it. There's Lenny, by the way, he woke up. I can get a better handle on all 32 rosters in a way that's unique or whatnot. And I think that's more important than platform in a sense, because platforms come and go and people figure out how to use them, and just always being open to them. And I think consuming them and trying to see what's out there is really important, but far more important than being like good on Twitter or TikTok or YouTube or whatever the next thing is just knowing what the hell you're talking about. And it seems to me that, regardless of age, background, whatever, that seems to prevail in most cases.
Absolutely. Let's take some questions. And just as a reminder, if you can turn your camera on when you ask a question, that would be awesome. Let's start with Jess. Just say who you are and let your question rip.
Hello. Hi, Mina. Nice to meet you. My name's Jess Navarez. I do a podcast with the Cowboys, so the only all-girls podcast on the network. What I've found is kind of maneuvering as a woman in this industry can be a lot different than, what men have to kind of deal with and go through. What is your best advice for how to maneuver through those hardships and kind of finding your people in your circle that can kind of help you through that?
Yeah, the way that my gender and racial identity as well have kind of affected my job, it's really changed me as my job has evolved. I would say it plays a much bigger role in how I'm perceived as an opinionator than it did as a reporter. Don't get me wrong, I had some weird stuff happen when I was a reporter too, and certain thing. I also would argue that it gave me a bit of an edge in that I was a bit more memorable to players and whatnot. But as an opinionator, obviously it affects your perceived credibility. It affects the dynamics of your interactions with others being different in any way, setting aside what way, will always lead to that. I've found a couple things, I guess, lessons that I've learned over time. One is something that you've kind of alluded to there, which is figuring out the people who did want to engage with me as an analyst, and really seeking advice from them, being in dialogue with them. I've been really fortunate at ESPN to have a lot of former players in particular who have my back. But what I always tell people is, they see on TV that the former players, the analysts that I work with, are really supportive and funny and whatever. And on social media, they, cheerlead me. That's based on a foundation of thousands of conversations. Dan Orlovsky, who's former quarterback who I'm on NFL Live with, we were friends for well over a year before we started doing TV together, because I don't even know how it got started, but we started sending clips to each other, like not clips of us, tape. Like we just noticed it. I'd be like, wow, it's crazy that you put this out. I noticed this stat. We were in dialogue and built that sort of professional respect that I think underlies what you see on TV. So it's a relationships business. And I think sometimes people, that sounds like a cliche, but those relationships aren't always transactional. It's really all about developing respect and an exchange of ideas, I think. And I think it's especially important when you're a woman to identify the folks who are willing to engage and teach and listen and whatnot. The other side of it, of course, is the external side, which is just abuse and whatnot. And this is something that everybody gets right now in our industry, whether you're a reporter, whether you're an analyst, regardless of race and gender, although of course it's certainly amplified if you're different. And my approach to that has really changed over the years. Earlier in my career, I struggled with it. found that affected my work at times, my confidence. At times I would try to make light of it or clap back. Now, because my platform is so large, I just don't see most of it. I have all of my filters and whatever set up to where I just miss a lot of it. Just because it's too much. It's just like a fire hose of both positivity and toxicity. Unfortunately, that's not useful advice for people who are starting out their careers, because I do think you have to be more engaged than I am. So it kind of sucks, right? I've really tried to be deliberate about the approach that I take and what I see, what I don't see, just knowing how it affects my own mental health. It's a long answer, sorry.
I love that low-key flex of my platform is so big now, like I just don't even see it.
It's just too much. Well, it's also like now, like, you know, a lot of bots and
kind of piggybacking off of, I had questions for both of those answers that you gave, but and off of what Jess said, it's no shock that the sports media field is just dominated by men. And in your recent appearance on the Pivot podcast, Ryan Clark called you a guy's girl. What does that label mean to you? Do you wear it proudly? Was that something where you were kind of like when I first heard it, I was a little, I understand that he didn't mean any offense by it.
He means it
course, but absolutely. But, you know, in such a, as you said, toxic, you know, environment that we're surrounded by now. I was just curious of if you do wear that badge proudly.
I'll say this, it's something that I give because of the way I present, what I do for a living. I think a lot of former players aren't used to being around someone. Nobody, I mean, not many people do it, right? So it is novel to them, and I think that's kind of what he was commenting on there. Also, I think he was mostly when he used that phrase, he's probably referring to his own comfort in acting a certain way around me. But the way I view it is this: sometimes when I hear women in our field asked about being women, they say, well, I was on a panel once, actually, not too long ago, where somebody said this. Oh, well, you know, you can't lead with your gender, and in fact, you shouldn't acknowledge it. That'll just kind of hold you back, and you shouldn't acknowledge the unique challenges. I think that's bullshit. Like, I am different. It makes me unique. It affects me differently. The way people treat me is different. It is not what I lead with. I think, I always try to lead with the actual work that I do, but to ignore it would just be ignoring reality. And I think it wouldn't be helping all, the various other people who are kind of dealing with the same thing. I have spent a lot of time trying to see that difference as an advantage rather than a hindrance. And I think in some ways I've accomplished that, in some ways maybe not so much. But it is very much like a part of why I stand out on television, and to say otherwise would just be a lie.
Oh, let's jump back. No, sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
You go.
I was just going to say, let's go back to more questions. So let's go to Corey.
Hey, Mina, how are you doing? My name is Corey Moses. I'm a sports anchor out in Austin, Texas. I work for the ABC station out here. And just listening to you talk and knowing all the things about NFL Live and seeing the show and knowing that's one of the best shows on TV right now because of personalities. But you talked about the balance of having to show the personality, but also being prepared. How have you been able to kind of balance the two, and with your co-hosts, and knowing that, like, I'm prepared, but I also want to leave some room for authenticity?
That balance that you just described is the key to, I think, good television, right? Trying to achieve it. We fall short sometimes. I mean, there are times in NFL Live when we're too nerdy. There are times when we're just literally cracking jokes, and it's like been 10 minutes and our producer's like, not everybody wants to hear you guys have inside jokes for 10 minutes. So I think that the goal every episode for us especially when we're on together, the main cast, is to try to achieve that like perfect balance of educating and entertaining, right? I think what I love about that show in particular, and I appreciate what you said about it, is we disagree, but it's the foundation of the show is mutual respect and I genuinely believe it's proof of concept that people enjoy watching that. It has like a true family dynamic, and it's real. Like I hang out with them, like they're my friends, those are my brothers. But I think that it's really important always to have a framework in mind. We want to talk about this. We want to accomplish this. We have this like great discussion about whatever football trend teed up, but there's room within that discussion to get some jokes off, to go back and forth a little bit, to interrupt each other respectfully. And, it took a lot of reps to kind of get to that point. We did the show in COVID remotely for a while, which was challenging, but I think it served us really well because we learned to really listen, which I think is the final thing, just like listening. Sometimes when you watch TV, you can tell people are just waiting to talk. I think another thing that we really try to do is listen, be prepared to change what we're going to say, to change our points, to riff off of each other, just so that it feels more conversational.
Thank you.
Let's go to Molly.
Hi, Mina. This is awesome. So I'm not in college. I just wrapped up my junior year of high school and I'm going to my senior year. So I know I see all your eyes. That's really, thanks guys. So I am just starting my applications right now. And I want to be in sports media. I really want to be an on-camera personality. So what would I think my biggest question now is what would be the best steps, and at least you think, to be prepared for that world that is the postgraduate world like that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm very envious that you know what you want to do, because I didn't know what to do when I was your age. That wasn't obvious earlier from my meandering path a little bit. So I would say, one, be prepared. It might change. You never know. And be open to other opportunities if they come along the way. But as far as, being an on-camera personality, whether it's an analyst, a host, sideline reporter, I'll go back to what I said earlier about expertise. You can learn how to be on camera. It is a craft. Like the host of NFL Live, Laura Rutledge, little things she does in hosting that no people will ever appreciate, blow my mind every day. Her ability to have like 20 voices in her ear and make it seem like we're all just chilling is unreal. I would lose my mind. But I would maintain that one of the reasons, a huge reason why she's so good at hosting NFL Live is not just because of the craft of hosting, but because she really spends a lot of time trying to better understand the game and the dynamics of the league. She listens to podcasts. She reads a lot. She listens to every time we have a conversation, she's in the room listening, and not just passively listening, asking questions. So I would say, regardless of whether you want to be an analyst or a host, making sure, that you have an understanding of a sport you're interested in covering, a team, a league, and that entails reading like crazy, listening to podcasts, just being really attentive to what's going on. That'll really help you, so that when you are on camera, whatever capacity is that you're in, you'll have that knowledge to work off of, and people can tell.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Let's go to Brandon.
Hi, Mina. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I am a freelance writer for Blogging the Boys. And one of the things that you kind of talked about a little bit with your background and different things that you've done. For me, I'm a triplet with the background and everything. We were in a band for 12 years, and I try and incorporate that into my work as a writer. But I do know sometimes that certain people, when they're reading my stuff, that's not what they're looking for and anything. So similar to Corey's question, how do you balance sort of your personal experiences in your writing and kind of convey a certain story and narrative that kind of ties into what you're talking about?
You're a triplet?
Yeah. Yep. All boys.
That's
It's crazy. Bless
amazing.
my parents. Yeah.
I've never met a triplet. I don't think so. I think that's really cool. You should mention it a lot. I think it's really interesting. Yeah, I find that it really depends on the platform and what I'm doing. So like on a show like TV, it's really it doesn't come up a ton. Because sometimes I would say for me, when I'm on TV, when I bring in my own experiences, a lot of times it'll be like, oh, I reported this thing once, and I remember, like I've spent a lot of time with DeAndre Hopkins, and we're talking about him right now, and I'll be like, it's funny, he once couldn't list, I forgot what show I was on, but a long time ago I was interviewing him, and he couldn't name all the quarterbacks who had thrown him passes because there were so many. And that story felt pertinent to the discussion because we were talking about like what quarterback he'd want to play with. And I was saying, so I think I always try to ask the question like up to myself, is this adding value to the discussion, or am I just bringing it up because it's the personal experience of mine? As a writer, I really didn't, I used the first person a fair amount, but I would often kind of leave myself out of the stories. The profiles, but those are features. It was a little bit different. So I think it really depends on the kind of writing you do. But again, it was always guided by the same principle. Is this making it better? Sometimes I would write in the first person just because it would serve the purpose of the story and kind of drive it along if I relayed the experiences that the subject and I had. I mean, Rogers came to my house, so I had to write myself into that story. I remember. Which I did not plan on doing or wanted to do. But, I think just kind of always asking that question before you do it and recognizing sometimes it really does. And I would also add, there are certain formats like podcasting where they're more personal. So people actually do want to hear more about you. My football podcast, I don't really, I talk to myself that much. Sometimes I'll talk about like books I'm reading or whatnot. Whenever I put out calls for questions, most of them are like football, but a lot of them are like, what do you feed Letty? Like, I don't know, like people just kind of want to get to know you in that particular format. So I think recognizing, why are people here? Is this a format where people actually do want to know more about me? And does telling this story serve the function of whatever I'm doing? And always asking that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
I'm trying to find, we had Field Yates on, I can't even remember now if it was last month or the month prior. And we talked heavily about his podcasting. And one of the things he said is like, the thing I love about podcasts is like, can you sit down and have a beer with me when I'm talking to you? Because then that means it could be a good podcast, something along those lines. And I always said, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how, I like certain podcasts, because I feel like I could just like personalize with them. So I'm totally with you on that. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry, one more question.
No. Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's go to Nick.
There we go. I found the unmute button. Mina, how you doing? My name is Nick Mantis. I'm a currently a freelance sports anchor. I actually just got a job with iHeartRadio, but I've been a sports anchor locally for the last 4 years at 2 different TV stations. Through my journey, it's kind of been similar in the path of what you were just kind of referencing, of kind of being open to new things, because I was originally a strength and conditioning coach. And that led me into wanting to tell stories about the athletes I was literally spotting in the weight room. and then that led into me, going to journalism school and then now doing all this. My question to you is through that process, has there been something that you've learned, whether it's in your personal life or through journalism, that was like one lesson that really sticks out every single week? It's like, oh yeah, that one thing that I learned from that I'll never forget. And what was it?
Oh gosh, it would be definitely different things for the different jobs that I've had, because I've had a few. So I would say as a writer, so back when I was doing more features and that kind of things, and this probably actually applies to other fields as well. But not trying to impress the people I was writing about is something I had to learn. I would sometimes ask questions solely for the purpose of just trying to make them like me or think I was cool or smart or knowledgeable, which doesn't really serve reporting. Now, there are things, I would say this though, if anyone here is a sports reporter, if you spend time trying to learn the game and you can integrate that into your questioning in subtle ways, that is a hell of a way to gain the trust of not just coaches and whatever, but players. Little things you say, hey, I noticed that you have like, you run the best hitch route in the league. I don't know, whatever. Just like little things like that really go a long way. But for the most part, not trying to ask questions to make myself look good is something that I had to learn. And then as a TV person, I guess, an analyst, there's been a lot of things. I can think of a few. When I give takes, not trying to have too many stats in one opinion, because that's a good way to get lost and to lose the viewer. So there's that. I think listening during the show is something I had to learn how to do. And it goes a long way to when you do have an opportunity to speak, if you can at least acknowledge the things that are said before you, be like, oh, it's interesting that you mentioned this, whatever. Honestly, that's such an important part of being good on television, is just making people feel like they're watching a conversation, and that goes really far. That was, and whatever format you're in, that's huge. So that was big too. And then for me, a big thing was learning to be more assertive on television. And that's not something that everybody struggles with, but I used to have producers in my ear being like, get in, and I wouldn't talk enough. And it's not a problem now for me, but that's something that I had to learn how to do, to just kind of be unafraid to interrupt others in a respectful way, obviously.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Jeff, did you want to hop in with it?
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, it's a kind of a good time to piggyback. I wanted to ask you about learning football, and you kind of touched on it with integrating some of those tips or keywords into your questions. I, like probably many people in the media field, I never played football. And I think that from a starting point, you feel like that puts you maybe at a disadvantage, not growing up and getting that initial base knowledge. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit, Mina, about how you've learned the game, whether it's talking to coaches, players, reading Football for Dummies, things like that. I don't know what you've done.
Yeah. So yeah, like a lot of people, when I first started as an analyst, I would classify myself as someone who loved football their whole life, had a good understanding of the game, but not the sort of deep understanding required to give educated opinions on TV. For me, it's been a lot of things. I would say as a foundation, figuring out the writers, people on the internet, so that can be like YouTubers, social media, whatever, who are doing good work, whether that's film breakdowns or writing articles that incorporate that, using data and consuming all of it, listening to all of it. And this is the important part, and this is something that really goes back to how I learned about economics as well when I was a business journalist. When you consume it, whether it's listening, watching tape breakdown, reading an article, making sure you understand everything. I think sometimes when we read, we have a tendency to be like, okay, he's talking about match coverage, whatever. It's like, no, if you don't know what match coverage is, stop, take the time, talk to people, watch some videos, read some articles, whatever. And then, so like being a very aggressive reader, I guess, is how I would describe it. And, for me, there's understanding the game on a more of an X's and O's level, and then there's understanding making sure I have a grasp of broader trends, roster things, that's just reading and doing the work. But when it comes to the X's and O's stuff too, if I want to if I'm reading and I'm pausing, like I said, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I didn't know what I'm reading an article about the Niners offense and they're referencing 18 Zorro, and I don't quite know what that means. I'm going to stop. I'm going to watch something. And then I'm going to ask people, I that's the other thing that, I was not always confident in doing earlier in my career because I was worried about looking dumb. But funny thing about football is a lot of times the former player, people have specific expertise and they might not actually know about other parts of the game, including former players, which is kind of funny. So you're not alone. And, I think, and people love explaining stuff. I'm really good friends with a guy named Michael Jr. used to work at ESPN. And last summer I was like, I just really want to have a better understanding of certain blocking stuff. And he spent a day with me, just walking me through some questions I had about some different run concepts and techniques. And now I feel really confident when I watch and in terms of IDing and seeing who's good at them. So I think being reading prolifically, actually reading, stopping when you don't understand things, looking them up, and then finding people you trust to ask questions, sort of a combination of all of those things.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's funny that you brought up Mike Golick Jr. because one of my questions to you, in my opinion, I think that you are one of the personalities that will become like the next generation in sports media. You, Mike Golick Jr., Christine Williamson, like some of these, I guess, for lack of a better term, because I also am one, elder millennials who are kind of coming up through the ranks here. You guys have a colorful personality, you come in with facts, you bring humor, you're able to connect with younger fans, but also have the respect from the older people who are looking for more of those stat driven and, knowledgeable things. Do you feel that the landscape of TV and social media is enabling talent like you to grow and build your career, or do you feel like it might hinder it?
Oh gosh, that's a great question because I think the obvious answer is, oh yeah, it's great, right? We're on social and everybody has different platforms. If you're not on TV, my job, I'm on linear a lot. There's a million other different things you can do to reach people. But I also think, not only is it obviously an attention suck and a time suck, but the kind of content that people are making for social isn't always the best for other like linear or other platforms. So I think if you're a person who's trying to do all of these things at once, you kind of have to be cognizant of the differences. And I would say like I probably wouldn't be where I am if not for social and the work that I've been able to put out there, but perhaps equally importantly, the people I've been able to meet with and connect with on there. But I also have to be pretty rigid about compartmentalizing the time that I spend there, the things that I make for there, knowing that it's only part of my job. Some people it is their whole job, so it's a little different. Yeah, just being pretty calculated, or not calculated is the wrong word, I would say deliberate about how I use it and what I see, what I look at, who I interact with, all of it, because it can really get away from you.
Yeah, it's easy for someone from the outside to then see whatever you're doing and comment on it, which is just unnecessary. Okay, we have 3 more questions we're gonna hit right now. Let's go to Ian. Hey, Ian.
Hi, everyone. First off, Mina, thank you so much for joining us. This is a great opportunity. And to Jeff and Lauren, thank you so much for hosting tonight. My name's Ian Nepetian. I'm a sophomore at TCU. I just finished up my sophomore year studying journalism and sports broadcasting. And for Mina, my question to you kind of revolves around you becoming an analyst. I think no matter what sport that we watch talk shows on, or just commentary about a lot of analysts or former players or coaches or front office execs. So I'm curious, how was your approach when you were becoming an analyst in terms of maybe not fitting that mold of, hey, I'm a former player. I used to be in this system, and now I'm coming into this space.
Yeah, it's a great question, because my job, I get a lot of, it's often pointed out that I'm the only woman, the only Asian American doing, but I'm also the only non-former player at ESPN doing it. And I would argue that's even more radical in certain ways. Although in other sports, particularly the NBA, I think you see it a bit more. So I would say this, and this kind of connects to something I've said a few times, I guess, really trying to figure out a couple things. One is, I am not bringing playing experience to the table, or positional expertise, which is, you notice when we have former players, a quarterback, there's an expertise there that comes with knowing how to read defenses, knowing about all the things that go into quarterbacking. If you have a defensive lineman, he might talk about the pass rush moves or whatever. I'm not coming to the table and saying, let me tell you guys about trail technique, because I'm a former cornerback. It's just not it. What I do, I would say, on our show and a lot of our shows, is I spend a lot of time working with data and integrating it with my own film study, but also the film study that the rest of our group does. And I think some of the best moments on our show, frankly, are when that all comes together. Dan and I collaborate a lot on this. I remember, like, ahead of the Super Bowl, I was looking up some splits for the Chiefs running certain plays out of 13 personnel, and he had a couple of clips, and I sent him like 20 plays, and he picked the ones he wanted to break down, and the stats were insane. And it all comes together in this great TV cocktail that I think is like pretty distinct and smart and television. But so for me, I spend most of my day squatting on our databases, just running reports and looking up things that are interesting to me, and then watching plays that come out of them. And I think that's probably the most unique thing I do as an analyst. We have a great research team at ESPN that does fantastic work, and they send research for the show. They collaborate a lot with our former analysts. But, for me, I do most of my own research with an eye towards what will be useful on television, what kind of games, players, whatever we're talking about. And I think it's made, I humbly, I think it's made our show better, because I think we use stats in a pretty sophisticated way that's changed really rapidly. I've got us to the point where we're no longer using like total yards to talk about who's good and stuff, that I'm pretty proud of. Still working on EPA per play for the heads. But, for me, it's been like, okay, I think, one, this is what I do, and it's what I love, and how I come up with original insights. But I also would say the really important part is not just doing that work, but communicating it to everyone, making them understand why it matters. And I think that's with stats, I think that can be a big challenge, for those of us who are interested in it. How do I convey that I don't know everything? There's a lot about what's happening on the field that I don't understand, that you understand. So here's something I'm bringing. Here's something you're bringing. Let's see how it comes together, and trying to always approach things with that attitude.
Yeah, as you said on that same Pivot podcast, I want to make people care about numbers. So I think you're doing a great job with that. I'm going to go to Emerson alum and former ESPN employee, Meg Robinson. Go ahead, Meg. You got to unmute yourself first.
I did, and then I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Hello. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Jeff.
Hey.
Emerson alumni, former ESPNer myself. I was there for 10 years. I've had a unique career path a little bit. Mina, also, thank you for doing this. I love hearing from you. I was in production for 10 years, did a little bit of work on NFL, College Game Day, and then I pivoted mid-pandemic, moved to Stillwater, Oklahoma, took an on-air job at Oklahoma State University, knew no one, and I'm doing on-air stuff for the university with athletics. I host a Oklahoma State podcast on Believe Podcast Network, trying to get back into sports full time, been doing a lot of networking. And one of the things that I've heard a lot is it's very competitive. There's not a lot of jobs for a lot of people who are interested. You've sort of talked about this indirectly, and you just spoke about how you stand out by being the only woman analyst, the only non-former player. So you stand out for many reasons, but what are some ways that professionally you recommend we could all try to stand out and differentiate ourselves from the thousands of other people who would like to be in your shoes or Laura Rutledge's shoes or any top reporter's shoes?
Yeah, I think this is where I talked about social media playing a large role in my career, really as a networking device, because when I started doing more analysis and really integrating stats into it and trying to come up with original insights and do my own film work and all that, social media was how I sort of communicated to the world, hey, like I really am bringing something different to the table. And I think that's your question is kind of about how you stand out. I think that's probably, when I was telling the story of my career and I was like, yeah, and then this person was like, why don't you do this? And this person, it can almost sound like obnoxious. It's like, what the fuck? Like, how do these opportunities just keep landing in your lap? But it was mostly because they noticed things that I was putting out into the world, conversations I was even having on social about football concepts. Not to say that I'm some sort of savant, I'm far from it. But, I just really tried to put myself out there as somebody who really was trying to find unique things to say about the game, about teams, and to be part of kind of higher level conversations. So it just keeps going back to that same idea of expertise, I think. But I do really believe with sports, if you're somebody who has original takes, original insights, some sort of new way of looking at something, people do notice if you focus on that. And that actually was kind of similar as a reporter too. It was always I found reporters who had like original angles and sort of story ideas who seemed to stand out almost more than the quality of the writing, frankly. And I think that there's some similarities with TV too.
Okay, we're gonna take Mike's question, and Nick, I see your hand is up too. We'll see if we have time for it, but let's go to Mike next.
Hi, big fan. Really like the podcast in particular. It's one of the 6 that I listen to every week. I was gonna ask a niche question. I'm in my 3rd year of covering the NHL for the Hockey Writers. It's a site. But the general thing that's been on my mind recently is with the Athletic laying off a bunch of their writers, some of them who I actually really like Bob Kravitz. I think he wrote the best article, one of the best articles in the year, when he talked about the Jeff Saturday media fiasco, Jim Irsay. But the thing that is for me, where has been bothering me is like the small market writers and a lot of the small market people who just start, especially someone like me who's just starting out. A lot of us who start out in the small marketplaces, those jobs particularly seem like they're in the line of fire. And when the Athletic says they're going to lay off a bunch of small marketplaces, it seems like those positions aren't vital, aren't seen as important. And what would you tell someone who's especially starting out in some of those places? That's what usually the opportunities start for. What would you tell them? Say, hey, your work, not only that the work, one, is important, and two, that this, I'm trying to say the best way to word it, but that it's that your work basically is important. There's also that market is valuable. Or I don't know.
Yeah, I would start by saying, I mean, just from a football perspective, some of the best minds, people with most interesting insights are small market reporters covering teams whom I read, who I try to credit. If they, if I get something from them, sometimes I have on my podcast if possible. There's no monopoly that the big places have on talent, that's for sure, when it comes to covering teams. Unfortunately, as we're just seeing with the Athletic this week, there's a couple of reporters there. Kravitz, Bob Stern covers the Cowboys, fantastic. One of the beat reporters who I always read. It's super discouraging to see those kinds of guys who do really good work get laid off. It feels, unfair. It's obviously something that our industry is like experienced now for certainly since I graduated from college. It's just not a new phenomena. The one thing I will say though is I do know, like, whenever I talk to people who are hiring at a national level, they do read like myself, the beat reporters on local, that's where they look for talent. And these opportunities, it tends to come in waves. Like I remember, when the Athletic didn't exist, it never would have occurred to me that there would be a new place that would hire as many people as they did, even though they laid off 4%, 20 people, they still employ a ton of people. And frankly, I have no idea, in another 2 years, there might be a different competitor to them. Maybe they'll go, it does seem like the desire for local sports coverage never goes away. Simply the economics of it continue to change, but constantly we see new places pop up, not just newspapers, podcasts, YouTube, whatever. I think, just continuing to hone one's craft and be the best beat reporter who covers that particular team. It does seem to me like the best of the beat reporters do tend to find new homes, at least based on, as someone who reads the NFL and who has read a lot of NFL beat reporters over the years, that's been the case.
Thank you.
Mina, would you be comfortable taking one more question from Nick?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
It'll be really, really quick, I promise. So I was up in Michigan. I moved down here to San Antonio, Texas. And one thing that's been really cool is people have started saying, in their day, you have a rose and you have a thorn. In your day-to-day, or what you've seen so far in your career, what have been like a standout of what's been a rose and what have you not liked in this career? What's been your thorn?
That's a nice question. The rose for me has been the getting to work with the mostly players that I work with and having them treat me like an equal. It's unreal, man. Like, I mean, I know you just talked about Jeff Saturday and however you feel about him being an NFL coach, and I think there was a lot of very fair criticism of that hire. I used to be on him on some shows like First Take, and I remember once in the green room, and if I'd told the story before, he saw me pulling some stats, and he called me literally like an hour later and asked me to walk him through it. Like, that's so fucking cool. Jeff Saturday, I wish I could build a time machine and tell myself watching the Hall of Fame Center. Like, that dude is going to be calling you, asking you what you think about something, which, by the way, he's an extremely cool dude and very open-minded to that kind of stuff, which I don't take for granted either. But so just developing those relationships, getting to ask them questions, them asking me questions, truly one of the most valuable, just rewarding professional experiences of my life. I think for thorns wise, it has been the moments when I have let outside criticism affect me and affect how I feel about my work. I was just telling someone, I get called a diversity hire on the internet probably every day. And 9 times out of 10, well, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I don't see it because of my little filters. And then the other, most of the time, it's so knee jerk. It doesn't, I'm like, it's not really about me. I don't feel it. But every now and then, sometimes I'll be like, oh man, I'll click on the photo and it's like a real person and they got a kid. And I'm just like, it just kind of makes me sad. So I would say those moments where I do let it kind of make me feel a certain way. It sucks because you never want to let other people have that sort of power over you.
All right, we're just about to wrap it up, but Mina, I want to give you one last hurrah here. Is there anything you want to say, anything you want to plug, anything, very hot ones? Say to this camera, this camera, this camera.
If you guys like the NFL, check out my podcast and the Couch Show featuring Lenny. But otherwise, I really appreciated getting to talk to you. You asked so many great questions. Hope it was helpful in some way. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Mina. And
Thank you.
everyone just stay tuned for our next event next month. And this Zoom will be on the YouTube link and we will share that. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, Mina.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.